Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're diving deep into Lee Kuan Yew's From Third World to First.
Oh, this one's a classic.
It really is. And it's his personal account of transforming Singapore from a tiny island with limited resources into a global economic powerhouse.
It's really a fascinating look at leadership, nation building, and the challenges of development, all seen through the eyes of someone who is at the very center of it all.
Absolutely. And to really get the most out of this deep dive, I think it'd be helpful to start with a quick overview of the book's main themes. What would you say are some of the key takeaways that we should keep in mind as we go through this journey with Lee Kuan Yew?
Well, one of the overarching themes is pragmatism. Lee Kuan Yew wasn't bound by ideology. He was focused on what worked, what would deliver results for Singapore.
Right.
Whether it was attracting foreign investment, building a strong education system, or even dealing with political opponents, he always took a practical, results-oriented approach.
That practicality definitely comes through in his writing. He's not afraid to make tough choices, even if they're unpopular, as long as he believes they're in the best interests of Singapore.
Exactly. And another key theme that emerges is his emphasis on discipline and hard work. He believed that these values were essential for Singapore's success, and he instilled them in the government, the workforce, even in society as a whole.
He also had a deep understanding of geopolitics and the need for Singapore to navigate a complex and often volatile region. He was a master at forging strategic alliances and playing different powers off against each other to secure Singapore's interests.
And then, of course, there's his approach to freedom of speech and the media. It's controversial.
Right.
He believed that a completely free press could be destabilizing, especially in a young nation struggling to forge a cohesive identity. He argued that certain restrictions were necessary to ensure national unity and social harmony.
Right. That's definitely one of the most debated aspects of his legacy. So with those themes in mind, let's jump into the book itself. Lee Kuan Yew starts by taking us back to his early days growing up in colonial Singapore and witnessing firsthand the struggles of a society grappling with poverty, inequality, and political turmoil.
He paints such a vivid picture of those times, describing the squalor of the slums, the racial tensions that simmered beneath the surface, and the growing sense of frustration with British colonial rule. It's clear that these experiences had a profound impact on him, shaping his worldview and his determination to create a better future for Singapore.
And he was already showing signs of his future leadership, even in his youth. He was a brilliant student, excelled at debating, and was deeply involved in student politics. He even learned Japanese during the Japanese occupation of Singapore, recognizing the importance of understanding the language and culture of potential future partners or rivals.
That's a great point. It shows his forward-thinking nature and his willingness to adapt to changing circumstances. And after the war, he went on to study law in England, where he was exposed to new ideas about governance and political systems.
But he also saw the flaws in those systems, particularly in the socialist policies of post-war Britain, which he believed led to economic stagnation and a decline in personal responsibility.
Exactly. He was very critical of what he called the nanny state, arguing that excessive welfare programs created dependency and stifled innovation. He wanted to create a different kind of society in Singapore, one where individual initiative and hard work were rewarded, and where the government played a more limited role in people's lives.
And that brings us to the pivotal moment in Singapore's history, its independence in 1965.
Huge.
It wasn't a smooth transition. Singapore was initially part of Malaysia, but political and racial tensions led to its expulsion, leaving the newly independent nation facing an uncertain future.
Imagine the pressure. A tiny island with no natural resources, a diverse population with a history of racial and religious tensions, and surrounded by much larger and potentially hostile neighbors. It's a testament to Lee Kuan Yew's leadership that he was able to not only survive this crisis, but turn it into an opportunity.
He really had a monumental task ahead of him. He had to create a sense of national unity, build a viable economy, and secure Singapore's place in a world that was still caught in the throes of the Cold War.
And he tackled these challenges with his characteristic pragmatism. He understood that Singapore's survival depended on rapid economic growth, and he set about attracting foreign investment, building modern infrastructure, and creating a skilled workforce.
One of the most striking things about this period is his emphasis on meritocracy. He believed that Singapore couldn't afford to be held back by traditional hierarchies or cronyism. He wanted to create a system where the best and brightest, regardless of their background, had the opportunity to rise to the top.
And he wasn't afraid to make tough choices to achieve this goal. He implemented policies that were often criticized as being authoritarian, such as limiting the power of labor unions, cracking down on corruption, and even introducing strict social controls.
And then there's his approach to education, which he saw as the foundation for Singapore's future success. He invested heavily in building a world-class education system focusing on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. He wanted to create a workforce that was equipped to compete in the global economy.
And it wasn't just about technical skills. He also emphasized the importance of character development, instilling values of discipline, hard work, and civic responsibility in young Singaporeans. He believed that a strong moral foundation was essential for building a cohesive and successful society.
And this emphasis on education paid off. Singapore rapidly transformed itself from a low-wage manufacturing hub into a knowledge-based economy, attracting high-tech industries and becoming a global leader in fields like finance, biotechnology, and logistics.
It's truly remarkable how quickly Singapore is able to make this transition, and it's a testament to Lee Kuan Yew's vision, his ability to anticipate global trends, and his willingness to make bold bets on the future.
He often talks about the importance of looking ahead, of anticipating the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead for Singapore. He famously said, "If you can't see the wave coming, you'll be swept away by it."
And that's a great segue into his approach to geopolitics. He understood that Singapore's survival depended on navigating a complex and often treacherous regional landscape. He had to maintain good relations with both superpowers, the US and China, while also dealing with the complexities of Southeast Asian politics.
He was a master at playing different powers off against each other, securing aid and investment from both sides, while avoiding becoming too dependent on either one. And he was also instrumental in the formation of ASEAN, which he saw as a way to promote regional stability and cooperation.
He believed that a strong and united Southeast Asia would be better able to resist external pressures from both the US and China.
But he also recognized that Singapore couldn't rely solely on external alliances for its security. He built up a strong and modern military, investing in high-tech weaponry and training his troops to be among the best in the world.
He understood that in a region with a history of conflict, strength was the best deterrent.
And this brings us to another key aspect of his legacy: his controversial approach to freedom of speech and the media. He believed that a completely free press could be destabilizing, especially in a young nation struggling to forge a cohesive identity.
He argued that certain restrictions were necessary to prevent the media from being used to incite racial or religious hatred, undermine national unity, or spread false information that could damage Singapore's reputation or interests.
And he wasn't afraid to use the law to enforce these restrictions. He sued journalists and newspapers for libel, and he implemented policies to control the domestic media, limiting foreign ownership and giving the government the power to regulate content.
These actions were highly controversial, with critics accusing him of being authoritarian and suppressing dissent. But he defended them, arguing that they were necessary to ensure stability and protect Singapore's interests. He often said freedom can be a very fragile thing and it needs to be protected.
And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
We'll explore in more detail his approach to freedom of speech in the media, as well as his views on political secession, the challenges of maintaining social cohesion in a rapidly changing society, and his reflections on the successes and failures of his long and illustrious career.
It's going to be a fascinating journey, one that offers a unique perspective on leadership, nation building, and the complexities of balancing individual freedoms with the needs of a society.
So join us next time as we continue our deep dive into Lee Kuan Yew's From Third World to First.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Lee Kuan Yew's From Third World to First. We left off talking about his approach to freedom of speech and the media, so let's pick up there. What's interesting is that his views on this weren't black and white.
Yeah, you're right. It's not as simple as saying he was against a free press entirely.
Right.
He understood its importance, even quoting positive views from the U.S. State Department about the role of a free press in a healthy democracy.
Exactly. But he also saw the potential for a free press to be misused, especially in the context of Singapore's unique vulnerabilities.
Okay.
He actually uses the example of the Philippines, where he believed a highly partisan press actually hindered development by spreading misinformation and inflaming divisions.
So for him, it was about finding that balance,
Yeah.
what we called calibrated freedom, where the press could operate freely, but within certain boundaries to safeguard national unity and stability.
Right, and those boundaries were often defined by the overriding needs of Singapore, a phrase he uses repeatedly to justify policies that some saw as authoritarian. He felt that in a young nation surrounded by larger powers and struggling to forge a common identity, the government had a responsibility to manage the flow of information and prevent the media from being used as a weapon against the state.
And that leads us to his clashes with Western media outlets, which he saw as often biased against Singapore and more interested in sensationalism than objective reporting. He felt they didn't fully grasp the complexities of the region or the delicate balancing act he had to perform as a leader.
Yeah, his libel suits against publications like the Asian Wall Street Journal and the Far Eastern Economic Review are a prime example of this tension. He felt they were deliberately misrepresenting his actions and motives, and he was willing to use the law to defend his reputation and the integrity of the government.
Those suits were definitely controversial, and many saw them as an attempt to stifle criticism and control the narrative. But from his perspective, it was about drawing a line, sending a message that he wouldn't tolerate what he perceived as deliberate attempts to undermine Singapore's stability.
He believed that a responsible press had a duty to be accurate and fair, and that those who crossed that line had to be held accountable. And it's not like he was against criticism per se, but he expected it to be grounded in facts and presented in a way that didn't jeopardize national unity or security.
And it's important to remember the historical context here. Singapore in those early decades was facing real threats both from communist insurgents within and from hostile neighbors in the region.
Oh.
The Cold War was at its peak, and Southeast Asia was a battleground for influence between the superpowers.
Oh, absolutely. He felt that Singapore was in a precarious position and that any sign of weakness or internal division could be exploited by those who sought to undermine its independence. So he saw a controlled media as a necessary tool to maintain stability and project an image of strength and unity to the world.
He also believed that a controlled media could play a positive role in nation building, promoting shared values and shaping a common narrative for a diverse population. He felt it was important to counter divisive forces and foster a sense of belonging among Singapore's different ethnic and religious groups.
And this ties into his broader philosophy of governance, which was deeply pragmatic and focused on delivering results. He wasn't beholden to any particular ideology. He was willing to experiment, to adapt, to do whatever it took to make Singapore succeed.
One of the things that really struck me in the book was his willingness to admit mistakes. He acknowledges that not all of his policies were successful, and he reflects on the lessons he learned from those experiences.
That's what makes him such a compelling figure. He's not trying to portray himself as infallible. He's open about the challenges he faced, the difficult decisions he had to make, and the times when he got things wrong.
And this leads us to one of his biggest concerns about political succession. He knew that he wouldn't be around forever, and he was determined to ensure that Singapore's future was in capable hands.
He worried about what he called the bonsai oak phenomenon, where younger leaders raised in the sheltered environment of a successful nation lacked the depth of experience and the hard-won wisdom of those who had fought for its independence.
He felt that future leaders needed to have a deep understanding of Singapore's history, a strong commitment to its values, and the ability to make tough choices in the national interest. And he didn't just wait for these leaders to emerge organically. He actively sought them out and mentored them, giving them opportunities to learn and grow.
And of course, there's the story of his son, Lee Hsien Loong, who eventually followed in his footsteps to become prime minister. He talks about the challenges and expectations that came with being the son of such a prominent figure, and the deliberate efforts to ensure that Loong's rise to power was based on merit, not nepotism.
He even shares some very personal anecdotes about Loong's life, including the tragic death of his first wife and the challenges of raising two young children as a single father while also navigating the pressures of a political career.
Those moments really humanize both father and son, reminding us that even the most powerful figures face the same personal tragedies and struggles as ordinary people.
It's clear that he had high hopes for his son's leadership, but he also recognized that Loong would face a different set of challenges than he did. The world was changing, and Singapore had to adapt to a new era of globalization, technological disruption, and shifting geopolitical alliances.
He talks about the rise of China, the increasing interconnectedness of global economies, and the need for Singapore to stay ahead of the curve, constantly innovating and reinventing itself to remain competitive.
He also saw new challenges emerging within Singapore itself, such as rising inequality, social stratification, and a sense of complacency among some segments of the population. He believed that Singapore had to find ways to address these issues to ensure that the benefits of economic growth were shared by all, and that the country remained a dynamic and vibrant society.
And that's a good segue into the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore Lee Kuan Yew's reflections on the successes and failures of his long career, his views on the future of Singapore, and the enduring legacy of his leadership.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into From Third World to First. We've covered so much ground already, from Lee Kuan Yew's early years to his sometimes controversial policies and his thoughts on Singapore's future.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it? And in this last part, I think it's really important to focus on Lee Kuan Yew's own reflections on his legacy, both the triumphs and the controversies.
He doesn't shy away from addressing the criticisms that were leveled against him, particularly regarding his approach to individual liberties and democratic values.
Yeah, he acknowledges that some of his decisions were tough, even unpopular. But he argues that they were necessary for Singapore's survival and ultimate success.
He often frames his decisions in the context of the times, reminding us that Singapore in those early decades was a fragile nation facing existential threats, surrounded by hostile neighbors, and caught on the crosscurrents of the Cold War.
Right, he felt a strong hand was needed to guide the nation through those turbulent times. And he believed that individual freedom sometimes had to be subordinated to the needs of the collective, especially when it came to national unity and security.
He makes a compelling case that in a multiracial, multi-religious society like Singapore, a completely unfettered press could easily inflame tensions and undermine social cohesion.
Yeah, he felt that irresponsible reporting or deliberate attempts to sow discord could have had disastrous consequences for a young nation struggling to find its footing.
And he points to the relative stability and harmony that Singapore achieved under his leadership as evidence that his approach, while perhaps not ideal in a Western liberal democracy context, was ultimately effective in the unique circumstances of Singapore.
He argues that Singaporeans were willing to trade some degree of individual freedom for the security, prosperity, and social order that his government provided.
He even suggests that Western-style democracy, with its emphasis on individual rights and a completely free press, might not be the best fit for all societies, particularly those with deep-seated ethnic or religious divisions.
He believed that a strong, centralized government with a clear vision and the power to act decisively was essential for guiding development and maintaining order in a rapidly changing world.
But he also recognized the importance of adaptability and the need to evolve with the times. He was constantly reassessing his policies, making adjustments, and looking for ways to improve Singapore's system of governance.
He even acknowledged some of his mistakes, like delaying the implementation of English as the primary language of education, which he later realized hindered the economic prospects of many Chinese students.
Those moments of self-reflection are really insightful. They show that he wasn't dogmatic or inflexible, but rather a pragmatic leader who was willing to learn from experience and adjust his approach based on the results.
He also understood that his own leadership wouldn't last forever, and he devoted considerable energy to preparing Singapore for the future, focusing on nurturing a new generation of leaders and ensuring a smooth transition of power.
Yeah, he believed in meritocracy, not just in terms of individual advancement, but also in the selection of those who would guide the nation. He wanted to ensure that the best and brightest, regardless of their background or connections, had the opportunity to serve Singapore.
And he instilled in them a deep commitment to the values that he believed had made Singapore successful: pragmatism, discipline, hard work, and a focus on the long-term interests of the nation.
He was acutely aware of the challenges that Singapore would face in the 21st century, including globalization, technological disruption, and the rise of new global powers, particularly China.
He felt that Singapore had to stay nimble, constantly adapting and innovating to maintain its competitive edge in a rapidly changing world.
He also saw potential threats to Singapore's social cohesion, such as rising inequality, a widening gap between rich and poor, and the potential for social divisions to emerge along ethnic or religious lines.
Right. He urged future leaders to address these challenges head on, to find ways to ensure that the benefits of economic growth were shared by all Singaporeans, and to preserve the sense of unity and common purpose that had been so essential to the nation's success.
He ends the book on a note of cautious optimism, expressing confidence in Singapore's future, but also acknowledging the hard work and continued vigilance that would be required to navigate the challenges ahead.
It's a powerful message, one that challenges us to think deeply about the trade-offs inherent in governance, the role of leadership in shaping the destiny of nations, and the enduring importance of values like hard work, discipline, and a commitment to the common good.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into From Third World to First, I'm left with a sense of awe at Lee Kuan Yew's accomplishments, but also a recognition of the complexities and contradictions inherent in his legacy.
Yeah, he was a man of his time, shaped by the unique circumstances of Singapore's birth and its struggle for survival. And while some of his methods might seem authoritarian by today's standards, there's no denying the profound impact he had on Singapore's transformation into a global economic powerhouse.
His story is a reminder that leadership is not about easy choices or simplistic solutions. It's about making tough decisions, often in the face of uncertainty and opposition. And it's about having the courage to chart a course for your nation, even if it means challenging conventional wisdom or defying expectations.
From Third World to First is a must-read for anyone interested in leadership development and the challenges of building a successful nation in a complex and ever-changing world.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of Books and Bytes. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey through Lee Kuan Yew's remarkable life and legacy.